Let me tell you a quick story about how I burned out and how I finally had gotten everything that I'd been working over a decade to get, but it just kind of wasn't enough or kind of felt like I collapsed at the finish line. I had a family now with 3 kids, paid off all my debt. I had multiple businesses making good money, but I just kind of felt like I was floating. You know, kind of like when a trapeze artist is swinging and they let go of the bar, they're kind of flying through the air, reaching for that next bar. And that's what I felt like. I felt like I was reaching out, but I didn't know what that bar was I was going to grab. And that moment between the two safe places, I just kind of felt lost. And my problem was I didn't know what was next. So I just kept falling further and further down, just hoping there'd be a net there at the bottom to catch me. So how did I kind of process what was keeping me stuck? How did I determine what was next? And how did I start to bounce back? And hopefully this will help you a little bit if you are struggling a little bit with burnout or trying to figure out what's next for you. So let's go back 5 years just to kind of set the stage and start the story. I just launched SwitchPod on Kickstarter at the beginning of 2019. It had raised over $400,000, which was and still is kind of the biggest launch or splash I've made online. And both in reach and being able to connect with a bunch of people and number-wise, like that was a lot of money. Chase's like private bankers like reached out to me and they're like, hey, we have a lot of money. Would you like to use it in different ways with us? That was weird, by the way. So 2 days after that $100,000 launch, my wife, Jen, found out she was pregnant again. This was after miscarrying a few months prior, which was also an emotional toll on our family. And there was just a lot going on at that time. Fast forward through the next 9 months, we were full on getting everything ready for baby number 1 to come. I was working really hard to finalize the manufacturing and design of SwitchPod, line up retailers, get it ready to ship to over the 5,000 people that had pre-ordered it worldwide, all while continuing to do video production and editing for all of my clients, which was my main business, and trying to keep my business of 2 people going strong as well. So fast forward to early 2020, we had shipped the first batch of SwitchPods. We now had a new baby, 4 months old at home, just relaunched this podcast actually, and I was doing in-person interviews, and the global pandemic hit. And I had to quickly rework what my main client business was, because I was used to traveling 30 to 50 days a year, packing up all my camera gear, taking it on the plane, flying around the US or worldwide. And with the pandemic and a baby at home, I couldn't do that. I couldn't travel at all, basically. So I still had a full-time editor I was paying. I was still working on SwitchPod. Our family was growing. I had to provide for that, etc. There's a lot going on. So pandemic was a tough transition for me, and I was still able to film a bit locally for clients. I shifted to hiring teams of videographers to go to the clients or that were already local to film for me. And then I would focus exclusively on producing those. So doing all the planning beforehand stuff and the editing and doing all that kind of virtually, working from home for the video projects. At the same time, SwitchPod was growing quite a bit, which meant it was taking more time to land new retailers globally. I was trying to get into big box stores like Best Buy, handling orders and conversations with all those retailers, doing customer support, working on new product lines and developments and prototyping. And the mix of doing the client work and SwitchPod brought in a good amount of money for us as a family through the early years of the pandemic of 2020 and 2021. But fast forward to 2022, which was officially just the busiest year of my entire life. At that point, at the beginning of 2022, we had 6-month-old twins, and we also had a 2-year-old at home. None of them were in preschool or daycare of any sort, so they were home all the time unless they were going to the park. And my mom was helping out occasionally. She would come visit and help out here and there. And my wife was full-time mom and then some. And I was looking for a way to continue to bring in money in this kind of post-pandemic transition of bringing in other kinds of clients. A couple months into 2022, I ended up booking a very large client project with 12 3-day-long on-location video shoots. This ended up being the largest project I've ever landed. It was multiple 6 figures, all said and done. And I was going back and forth with my wife about whether it would make sense to have me continue to travel like I used to all of these video shoots. And they were complex shoots that required multiple people, probably a 3-person team. And this would mean more income for us as a family because I wouldn't have to hire someone else to do what I normally do, which is like lead the video shoot. But it would also mean a lot of time away from the kids, eventually, 12 times 5 days long because there's 3 days of shooting with a travel day on each end. And in the end, we decided it was best for us as a family to hire people to go do the filming for me. And I would stay home and do the producing of it, all the planning and coordination, as well as helping with the edit with my editor and do the other work I had, like SwitchPod and other client projects and making YouTube videos and all the things. So I decided to hire a team of contractors to go do it, but they also ended up using a lot of my video gear, so I couldn't do other things during those weeks that I might have done otherwise because I didn't have my cameras and stuff like that. So that took 6 months for that project. It was spent coordinating all the travel, prepping the gear, cleaning the gear, emptying the gear, charging the batteries, doing pre-production, getting the gear to the team, and then tag teaming the edit with my full-time editor, basically from March through September. It was a huge project, spent a lot of time on that, and it brought in a good amount of money as well. During this time also, SwitchPod sales were still going strong, which means that business needed constant attention every week too. And in the middle of all of that, I also partnered with Pat Flynn of Smart Passive Income to work on a YouTube course called YouTube from Scratch. So we launched that in the summer, and that meant I was spending time filming and editing his half of the course because he taught part of it, and then I had to plan and film and edit my half of the course too and support the launch and help launch it out into the world. And so all of that at the same time with 3 young kids, not in school yet. We ended up getting COVID in that period as well. And fast forward to the end of that client project, I had a bit of a falling out with the client and my subcontractors. From my perspective, they were entirely happy with everything that we had done. They were stoked on the quality of the output of the videos for what they were doing. The launch went super well, and I was operating under the assumption that that would continue going. And this is a longer story. I'm shortening as much as possible and trying to take my feelings out of it here. But long story short, after the successful launch of getting these 12 things out there, the client went to the subcontractor and hired them out basically from underneath me directly, cut me and my editor out, all the producing that we did, all the editing we did, and just went and hired them directly, kind of behind my back, basically. And I was not marking up prices at all on these subcontractors. I was passing every dollar through to them. I brought them a lot of work, multiple 6 figures paid to them during this 6-month period. And I was kind of blindsided by this. It came out of nowhere. My client revenue immediately dropped by near 100%, not 100%, but like 80 or 90% overnight. And it came out of nowhere because I just thought we were going to keep working together. And so I hadn't really been lining up other client work. So it was just like, boom, everything changed. Didn't have money coming in. And honestly, I felt really betrayed. I was mad for a long time. It made me not want to work with another client again or even trust any working relationship because I felt backstabbed, honestly. And so in the short term, there was this natural time to have my editor, who I'd been working with for 7 years, it was also family, move on and do a different direction for his career, which was all cordial and went fine. And in the long term, I had to figure out what I was going to do next. Like, was I going to go back to traveling and filming for clients again? Was I going to keep doing this thing where I hire subcontractors and potentially have them steal, in quotes, the work from me? Was I going to try to double down on growing SwitchPod? Was I going to go back to doing more content and courses of my own? Or was I going to do something entirely else that was just different in a completely different direction? I was immediately back to working by myself. And while I had built up some substantial savings from the launch of the YouTube course and the increased revenue from this bigger client project, I just didn't know what to do next. Because in 2021, we had gotten out of consumer debt from years of paying off medical bills, from my wife having cancer and other decisions of doing long-term travel and growing multiple businesses, or growing her photography business, me growing my video business. And then towards the end of 2022, we were really trying to save up for a down payment to buy a house. But as that kind of fell through a family friend that wanted more money than we were willing to pay for a house that needed work, and the increasing interest rates for houses at the end of 2022, and the market of houses just being insane then post-pandemic. It was just another thing that I thought was going to happen that fell through, which made me also more frustrated and more mad, just like losing the client did. So we had this pile of cash, both in business and personal checking accounts, and no urgent need to do anything with it. And so I drifted. I hemmed and hawed about kind of what the next steps would be for me, for my career, for my businesses. And I did that for a long time. I still had one client, an editing client on retainer, and SwitchPod sales were still going steady. So I would basically run the day-to-day of each of those things, take care of any personal things we needed done for the household, but I wasn't doing anything above and beyond to bring additional money in because we didn't need more money. I was kind of content with where we were at with life. And that went on and on for months as I kept trying to figure out kind of, what am I going to do? What am I going to do with my life? And after the kids were in bed, I would even start to drift towards things that are more of an escape than before, things like playing video games, which I had basically completely cut out of my life for years as I was building businesses and working to get out of debt. But I just wanted something to escape to at night and kind of turn off my brain, which I hadn't really needed for a long time as I was trying to grow things. I also started trying to go to therapy to process the things that I was mad about, both with the work situation I described earlier and with the house purchase that fell through. I started digging into some of the emotions I was having about both of those things and the surprise of having twins, because I hadn't fully processed that completely. Just kind of been in survival mode, knowing that we were trying to have our second kid. We ended up with our third also. So that was a big surprise to work through and to process with therapy, and talking about my relationship with my dad and how that was affecting me as a dad, and just so much more. And if you haven't tried therapy, I think it's worth trying. It's a powerful thing if you found the right person to do it with and to have those conversations with. Both my wife and I have therapists. And sometimes all you need is kind of someone not in your head or in your circle of family and friends to talk to about decisions or past experiences, to kind of think about them differently and get closure about them in a way that you wouldn't just by, just constantly thinking about it by yourself. Anyway, so as I'm doing all this personal work, trying to show up as a dad every day, working to figure out what I want to do next for work. I've been working by myself for nearly a decade, about 9 years at this point. And just in general, I felt like I was kind of sitting in an inner tube in a lazy river. That's kind of the metaphor that I use to explain it. You're just kind of doing a little paddling here and there to make sure you don't get stuck on a rock or that tree branch that's sticking out, or like, oh, they got some rapids here. But you're not actively trying to push yourself down the river. You're just kind of letting the river take you wherever it's going to take you, wherever it wants to go, and handling whatever kind of comes in your way, but you're not actively like pushing yourself down the river. That's kind of the metaphor that I was using to describe it to people, is either being in a velvet rut where it's like, this is a cushy place to be, it's a comfortable place to be, but I can't get out of it kind of thing. So I was doing this with my time for work every day, trying to just keep the lights on, do whatever was on my plate. But anything that my family needed, I would also take on. I would run to do errands all over the county to try to find baby formula when there was a shortage, or just spend too much time updating Quicken and doing monthly finance tracking and tasks, or scheduling doctor's appointments, selling the baby things we don't need anymore, downsizing my gear and equipment I wasn't using anymore and trying to sell that on eBay and other places. But the rest of my work time, I would try to spend figuring out what was next for me. I'd read business books and watch courses and YouTube videos and consume case studies of other entrepreneurs to see how they had built their businesses, what revenue streams were they using, how did they grow their audience. And I would also just obsess about my workspace, this garage office I have, or my filming setup. And I was just constantly changing where things were at, researching the perfect accessory or piece of equipment that would make my life easier or make things look better or sound better, etc. But basically came to the realization that I'm at my best when I'm busy and productive. I'm happier when I'm working on different problems or projects that I'm challenged by and that usually have deadlines to push me to work a little bit harder. I don't want to work crazy hours or nights and weekends and stuff like that, but just having some sort of deadline to push towards keeps me accountable to that, and something that helps me learn new skills, because I can't just be stagnant doing the same thing over and over again. So whether that's software or strategies or platforms, whatever it is, I like to learn new things. And I also learned that if I'm left to wander with too much freedom, an empty calendar, do whatever you want, I basically just get in my own way. So after a year of feeling this way, I kind of snapped out of it through plenty of conversations that were tough with my wife, my therapist, my closest entrepreneurial friends, with myself. And I was basically just ready for the next chapter. And so that's part of what this podcast is. It's one of the parts of this next chapter for me, to break out of my rut, to get off this hypothetical couch that is in the title of this podcast. But I really prefer to be unknown. I would rather not be famous. If I didn't have to be on the internet at all to make money in the way I want to make it, if I could do everything privately and be anonymous, that's what I would do. And this leads me not to post things online when I'm launching something, or even when I'm not, just showing behind the scenes, which I talked about in the previous episode. It leads me to not write publicly. It leads me to not record podcasts or film videos and post them. And it's why I go months or even years sometimes in certain formats without publishing on places like Instagram or this podcast, for example, or YouTube. And I don't really want to be famous. I have no interest in it, but I know the strength of a personal brand. I've seen that happen, and I've seen people use their personal brands to help my businesses grow, like SwitchPod, helping to launch that product. So I've learned so much from people sharing their thoughts, sharing their struggles, sharing their victories, their stories, their income reports, whatever it is. I've gotten so much value from people that I've both met and become friends with, but also people I've never met. And so I want to be able to do the same to other people. I kind of want to share what I've learned, share what I'm struggling with, and hopefully you get things out of that. And so I hope if you're interested in following along on this journey of getting off this couch and building these multiple businesses and revenue streams that I have now and I'm going to build, the goal of $500,000 a year in revenue, I hope you're here to just kind of follow along and hopefully do some of the same of yourself, of push yourself outside of your boundaries, push yourself beyond what you're comfortable doing, and build out different revenue streams. Have some security in the fact that you aren't reliant on one specific thing to bring in money for you and your family and who you're responsible for. So in the next episode, I'll kind of share how I determined that $500,000 a year revenue target number, because it's high. It's bigger than I think most people need to make, and it's more than I need to make, but it's that goal that I was just talking about a second ago. It's trying to pick something that can push me a little bit harder than I do by myself. It's like if you're playing Mario Kart and you have the time trials set up so that you have the ghost of your best lap on there, maybe it's going to push you a little harder than you would if you're just driving by yourself. If you go out for a run, maybe you run with someone that's a little bit faster than you, or you're running with the marathon speed keeper. I can't think of their name. The pace car, basically, the pace person of the marathon that's for the time you want to hit. That pushes you a little harder than if you were just out there running by yourself. So in the next episode, I'll talk about why I chose that dollar value. And it'll also encourage me to share some of my revenue numbers over the past 10 years of building my businesses, break down some of the math behind why that number is so big. But it's honestly not that unattainable for me with some of the things that I've done in the past. In other upcoming episodes, I'll talk more about the other parts of my businesses I'm building as well. I'll break down the different mix of where the revenue is coming from. I'll talk about physical products. I'll talk about digital products. I'll talk about doing client work or consulting or coaching and all the different ways that I bring in money through advertising and sponsorships and a lot more. So I'd love for you to consider subscribing to the podcast, or if you are already, consider leaving a review on either Apple or Spotify, or comment here on YouTube if you're watching it. And thanks so much. Hope you enjoyed hearing a little bit about my burnout, how I work to get out of it, and let's push forward and keep doing great things. So I'll talk to you again soon. Cheers.